On the 3rd of August, 2011, the trial of the former president of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, for corruption and ordering the killing of protesters began in Cairo. Along with Mubarak in the cage were his two sons, Ala and Gamal, his former interior minister, and 6 ex-police commanders.
محمد حسني السيد مبارك.
أفندم أنا موجود.
What was the 83-year-old former dictator thinking of in the courtroom that day? Was he perhaps reviewing the journey through life that had brought him to this place? New Year's Eve 2000. The world comes together to celebrate the coming of a new millennium. With it comes the hope of new beginnings. But not in my country. Just less than 3 months earlier, Egypt had already celebrated something rather different, and yet rather familiar. The re-election of President Hosni Mubarak for the 4th time. What a contrast from his promise 18 years previously.
In his first speech, when he became president for the first time, he said that he wouldn't stand for more than 2 terms, that his speeches wouldn't last longer than 20 minutes, that his wife wouldn't appear in the media, and, unlike others, buildings and public monuments wouldn't be named after him.
The president that took office in 1981 was a totally different person from he who was in control in 1999. And what of all the promises that he made back in those early days? All of them were forgotten or vanished.
People around him were all saying, "You are leaving? What will we do without you? You have to stay." This pressure was not just from the hypocrites around him, but also from his family. I don't mean his close relatives, but more the unscrupulous people surrounding him.
Mr. Mubarak had initially chosen to keep Mrs. Mubarak in the background. Yet, in the first years of his presidency, Suzanne did undertake minor activities which were accepted by the general public.
The Princess of Wales was accompanied by the wife of the Egyptian President, Mrs. Mubarak.
Then, as time went by, she became more and more prominent. She was ambitious to be center stage. They didn't advertise it widely, but Suzanne Thabit, now known as Suzanne Mubarak, was half Welsh. Her mother coming from the tiny coal mining village of Pontypridd. Lily Mae Palmer, the daughter of a humble Welsh coal miner, never lived to see this moment. Her daughter meeting Queen Elizabeth as Egypt's First Lady. Could life get any better than this? In 1993, just as her husband embarked on his second term, Suzanne, too, was emboldened to start her first major public project. Reading for All resulted in millions of books being distributed to the Egyptian public at below cost over the following 17 years. The only catch, the president's wife was on the back cover instead of the author.
She had a passion for art and music in particular. Classical, Western, and Arabic music. She was a good reader who had obtained a master's in sociology at the American University in Cairo.
ماجستير في السوسيولوجي.
As our president gained more and more power, his wife created her own court, surrounding herself with ministers and top officials.
She had no status within the constitution. She was just the president's wife. But it was always like, the first lady left, the first lady is back. Your presence was amazing in yesterday's speech. The speech was excellent. Egyptians are hypocritical to whoever is in power, with the result that they end up being turned into little dictators.
And this, to use Taha's words, is truly awesome.
While Susan Mubarak hogged the spotlight, her eldest son, Ala, now married and settled, was a changed man. With his bachelor days behind him, he was now also a father. Baby Muhammad, named after his grandfather, had arrived in 1997 to charm the president and perhaps to remind him of a happy childhood he himself never enjoyed.
Muhammad Ala was always playing with a toy pistol. If officials walked in, they would have to play with Muhammad and act dead when he shot them. If they didn't fall, Muhammad would get very angry. This happened once when a senior official came to visit the president. Muhammad took aim and fired. The man looked at him and smiled. He looked at his grandfather and asked why he didn't die. The president looked at the man and said, "Why didn't you die? Lie down, you're dead."
While the president and his grandson were playing shoot the official, the president's eldest son, Ala, was playing his own ruthless game. And the plaything, the influence his name could carry throughout Egypt.
In the late 80s, Ala began expanding into partnerships that many businessmen regarded as dubious. There was no reference to his name in any of these partnerships. The acceptable form of words was to call him facilitator, as he had the ability to influence ministers to facilitate the work.
The stories in Egypt about business conducted by Mubarak's sons became a laughing matter. There is, in fact, a famous joke. An owner of a cafe had photos up on the wall of the three presidents, Abdel Nasser, Sadat, and Mubarak. A guy walks into the cafe and asks who these guys are. The owner answers, "This is Nasser, leader of the 1952 revolution, President Sadat, who led the October War, and this is the father of my business partner, Ala."
While Ala was accumulating wealth and influence in his home country, his younger brother Gamal wasn't exactly cooling his heels in London, where he had been since the mid-1980s. Whatever he may have been doing behind the scenes, and the unsubstantiated rumors of money laundering and more were rife, publicly he was simply Bank of America's London chief. But it seems he was also biding his time for greater things back home.
I've been to London a few times, and he invited me to dinner at a restaurant behind Harrods. He was very keen on internal Egyptian politics and would ask or comment on a number of issues. I really felt this is where his interest in public affairs started.
June 2000, the death of a president and the birth of the first Republican dynasty in the history of the Arab world. Syria's Hafiz al-Assad had died after 3 decades in power.
تسمية الرفيق الدكتور بشار الأسد قائدا لمسيرة الحزب والشعب في القطر العربي السوري.
Within days of the funeral, the Syrian constitution had been amended to allow his 34-year-old son, Bashar the ophthalmologist, to become president. Where Syria led, others were inspired to follow.
President Bashar al-Assad took power after his late father. Ali Abdullah Saleh was preparing his son Ahmed. Saddam Hussein was preparing his sons Uday or Qusay. Muammar al-Qaddafi was preparing his son Saif. So it became a trend of succession in the region. This motivated Suzanne as a wife and mother.
For Suzanne Mubarak, it was like a light had been switched on. The chosen one would be her youngest son, Gamal, who by now had returned from London. Not only should he be thrust forward to succeed his father in due course, but the brilliance of the scheme would mean that a new president, Gamal Mubarak, would have no interest in prosecuting the mistakes of the old president, Hosni Mubarak. It could all be kept in the family.
Suzanne Mubarak's insistence on the triumph of the succession project wasn't just political. It was as much about her maintaining her social status, shifting from the president's wife to becoming the president's mother, similar to the Queen Mother. And there was an important psychological factor here too, in so much as Suzanne saw herself as the woman who made Mubarak a success, and she was now preparing another Mubarak, her son.
The first step in Gamal's eventual elevation to the presidency was for him to join the ruling National Democratic Party, which, if nothing else, was neither democratic nor national. From the outset, Gamal began to maneuver his way to power in the party. In less than 2 years, the ex-London banker was head of the NDP's Politburo, a powerful committee specially created for him.
His father respected his intelligence, claiming that he had finished his exams in a shorter time than normal, which meant he saved a whole year. His father really thought he was clever and generally respected his opinions.
Having taken over the party, the genius son also assumed responsibility for his father's office. The only way now to get to the president was to go via Gamal. But there was still a problem. The president himself was showing no signs of wanting to step aside in favor of his boy.
Initially, he was against his son succeeding him, not so much out of concern for the country, but more because he was generally selfish and wanted to remain in power, to the extent that he once said, "What would I do if I left presidency? Chop onions?"
November 2003. Disaster. As the president spoke in parliament, he collapsed. Live on air. Egyptian television obligingly cut away from the moment, but the act was quite literally falling apart. Then, just over 6 months later, he fell ill again. This time, he traveled to Munich in Germany for back surgery.
I think it was in June and it was raining, it was terrible weather. They brought him in a wheelchair because he was in such a severe pain, he couldn't walk anymore. He was really, really suffering and his situation was like the weather outside.
His 1.5-hour surgery was completely uneventful and the president was on the road to recovery. But as he recuperated in his German hospital, rumors circulated in Egypt that he had died on the operating table. It was simple enough for Mubarak to put paid to the stories by making a television appearance. But he was also anxious to get back home.
This was always my impression, that he wanted to go back to Egypt as quick as possible to show that he's okay. And then I remember the first thing in the days after the operation, his goal was to walk as much as possible and to walk stairs. I remember this because he said, I want to leave as quick as possible, but I will not leave if I'm not able to walk down the gangway from the airplane, to show that I'm really back again and fit.
Within days of his return, Mubarak was appearing to act the strong man again. He shuffled his cabinet, introducing new faces, most of them businessmen and members of Gamal's NDP Politburo. In the streets of Cairo, we called it Gamal Mubarak's cabinet.
As the new generation came on the scene, his son, his son's friends, and a small group of businessmen, everything began to change. It was like an old man passing the steering wheel to his son, leaving us all to crash.
Gamal's ambitious agenda for seizing power from his aging father was getting more obvious. As the time approached for another presidential election in 2005, some said it was the moment for Gamal to make his move. But the old man was not going to go without a fight.
It's my honor to welcome President Mubarak to the White House again.
The kind of subtle messages from his father to us were that Gamal wasn't really ready and that he needed to stay.
The collective punishment.
If I go back, if there was one kind of constant thread with Mubarak, there was this kind of sense that he was irreplaceable. Only he understood Egypt. Only he could manage Egypt. And I think that even these kind of subtle messages about the son were kind of part and parcel of his indispensability to ruling Egypt.
Should stop.
September 2005, and the president, who had once promised to stay for only one term, was campaigning for his 5th term in office. And he also had a further surprise for the electorate. This time, thanks to a constitutional change, they were allowed to vote for other people. The trouble was that the rules were so narrow that only non-entities could stand against the man who had ruled our country for a quarter of a century. No one was surprised when Hosni Mubarak won a landslide victory. For the First Lady, her plans for a smooth succession for her son so that she could progress to First Mother may have been temporarily frustrated. But the reality was that she still dominated the project that was the Mubarak presidency.
What's your name?
Then she settled on another audacious plan.
Her obsession with winning the Nobel Peace Prize grew to the extent that she supported Farouk Hosni's appointment to UNESCO so as to help get her the prize. Then it was the Women and Peace movement, so she could get the Nobel Prize. She traveled the world making speeches, receiving whatever prizes she could. She created Reading for All. She visited children. I mean, she did everything, but none of it was spontaneous. It was all done for the purpose of furthering her personal glory.
À l'invitation de mon épouse, Bernadette, Madame Mubarak.
Who knows what delusions of grandeur must have inspired Suzanne Mubarak to believe that she could possibly be a candidate for a Nobel Peace Prize. But what was certain by 2008 was that her husband, now approaching his 80th birthday, was increasingly isolated as his wife and his son protected him from uncomfortable truths.
The president didn't always receive all the information that he should have. He just got told stuff that wouldn't upset him. If it was something that may disturb him, we were usually told not to tell him, just to make sure he was always in a good mood.
I couldn't believe it when the film, The President's Chef, came to the movie theaters of Egypt.
ازيك يا متولي؟ الله يسلم سعادتك يا ريس. قول لي هتوكلنا ايه النهارده؟
It was a huge hit and the talk of the streets.
أنا عايز شوية شوربة عدس. ثمنه كام الطبق؟ 3 جنيه يا ريس.
Everyone knew that although the producers said it was a fiction, this was really the true story of an isolated president whose only reliable informant about what was going on in the country was an unimportant functionary.
يعني أسرة بسيطة مكونة من 5 أشخاص. عايزين يتغدوا كشري يدفعوا 25 جنيه.
In the film, he was a chef. In reality, he was Muhammad Ashoub, the president's personal makeup artist.
الرجل ده لما كان بيصحى من النوم كل اللي حواليه سيدنا.
When that man woke up, he was like a master. No one could laugh, talk, or say anything to him. Everyone was serious. It was as if we were at war. So I was the one who would speak to him, tell him a few jokes, make him laugh, until he would then start talking constantly about politics, state affairs, or just generally socializing.
في شؤون الدولة.
أنت كذاب وتستاهل كل اللي يجرى لك.
وهم قالوا لي ما تتكلمش يا ريس. قالوا لي ما تتكلمش.
In the movie, the fictional president's henchmen fire his chef because of his relationship with the president.
عايز اقابل سيادة الرئيس. ممنوع. لازم اقابله.
Real life then mirrored art. When a year after the film was released, Ashoub was removed by Mubarak's inner circle.
لقوني ابتديت أتكلم معاه في حاجات.
They realized that I began talking to him about several issues, including his son's succession. To them, I appeared to be dangerous. Then I received a call from the Minister of Information saying, Ashoub, you will no longer see the president.
Mubarak continued as if nothing had changed over the years. He was still the country's loyal servant.
سأواصل معكم مسيرة العبور إلى المستقبل متحملا المسؤولية وأمانتها ما دام في الصدر قلب ينبض ونفس يتردد.
It was more a message to Suzanne and Gamal rather than to the Egyptian street. Conflict over the presidency had reached its peak.
Isolated and exhausted, yet still fighting. On the 18th of May 2009, the old man was hit by a family tragedy. As we Egyptians lived through President Hosni Mubarak's 5th term, we were confronted with a charm offensive orchestrated on behalf of his son, Gamal. Both the people and the president were the targets of the conspiracy.
My view is that they were pressuring him to create a new status quo. Whether they were working in the realms of journalism or politics, they were saying, we are on the scene, and we will make the succession of Gamal Mubarak real, a public and political reality.
Backed by anonymous benefactors with apparently bottomless pockets, Gamal was portrayed as the only choice to guide the country to a new sunny future.
لا زالت الاحتياطات من العملة الأجنبية في وضع قوي، بالعكس ده كانت بتزيد حتى في الفترة اللي فاتت.
Not only was he the great economist equipped with solutions, he was youthful, virile, and a mean striker of the ball. There was just one problem. Egyptians simply didn't like him.
جمال شخص فيه استعلاء داخلي.
Gamal was arrogant, very similar in character to his mother. He's a very conservative person who wasn't open to conversation, lacked social skills, and to an extent had little or no charisma.
His communication skills were very limited. He didn't have these skills, and perhaps he never believed how important training is, or of possibly acquiring the skills. Unfortunately, the guy felt that he was good enough already, and sadly, the people around him were treating him as a victorious pharaoh of Egypt.
Gamal's personality was not the only obstacle. A trusted Egyptian leader must certainly have a first lady, and Gamal, at 44, was still single.
وكانت بقى أمه معنية جدا بتزويجه.
His mother's main concern was to get him married. She told me at a wedding party that she wished Gamal would go on over to a group of beautiful girls who were dancing and just pick one.
23-year-old Khadija Mahmoud al-Gamal was massively younger than the aspiring president. But who knows exactly why or how she caught Gamal's eye.
There are men his age who prefer younger women. Why not? It is what he wanted. And there are also girls that like older men, the ones with power and prestige. So I couldn't tell whether she completed the picture or he liked the blonde model look. She didn't look like an Egyptian. Her figure wasn't really Egyptian. It was more like a model, a bit like Claudia Schiffer. She was all pretense.
The private wedding ceremony was held at the president's favorite resort, Sharm el-Sheikh. On the 4th of May 2007, the president's birthday. The new Mr. and Mrs. Mubarak were then able to throw themselves into the key matter in hand, staying in the spotlight so Gamal could be portrayed as the president in waiting. Meanwhile, the actual president stubbornly refused to leave the stage. But that was soon to change. On the 16th of May 2009, the president's favorite grandson, 12-year-old Muhammad, son of Allah, was struck down by a mystery illness. Two days later, he was dead.
What really made Hosni Mubarak collapse was the death of his grandson, Muhammad. I was aware of the relationship between him and his grandson. To Hosni Mubarak, Muhammad's death was literally Mubarak's death. After that, he constantly wore a black tie and refused to remove it.
The president was a broken man. He didn't even attend the funeral of his beloved grandson as he locked himself away in his home.
I think losing his grandchild represented a huge blow to him. If only he had resigned at that time. He had every reason to go, but he missed the opportunity, his honorable one, till the very last moment.
It may not have been obvious to the Egyptian people, but the old man had, in fact, given up. As he greeted President Obama in Cairo 2 weeks later, he made little effort to disguise his grief. He was ready to step down, but to the plotters in his household, the timing was not right. Better he stay on until such time as he could gracefully make way for Gamal to go through the motions of standing in the democratic election scheduled for 2011.
The president was shocked by this loss and wanted to retire. Suzanne Mubarak, Gamal, and a few others were resistant and insisted on him staying in office on condition that power would be transferred to Gamal when the time was right.
But the best laid plans have a way of going wrong. In March 2010, Mubarak fell sick again. The president and his entourage flew to Heidelberg in Germany. The official line was that he needed his gallbladder removed, and apparently no Egyptian surgeon could be trusted to perform the operation.
It was not an emergency operation, such as when you have a life-threatening disease and you need an operation within some days or even within hours. It was not an emergency. It was an operation that was needed.
As the patient was made comfortable in this room at the Heidelberg University Hospital, his wife and son were anxious to know that he would survive and not die an untimely death.
Certainly, they asked me whether Mr. Mubarak will be able to go back to his work as the presidency, and the answer was yes, we will do whatever is necessary to get him back to his regular work. I am accordingly happy to announce this morning that the President has fully recovered from the effects of the successful surgical intervention conducted on him exactly 3 weeks ago.
Shorn of his makeup, the President looked his age as he left Heidelberg after 3 weeks' recuperation. This time, there would be no celebratory descent from his plane on his own steam, as there had been with his previous return from hospital. Would this now be the end of his presidency?
It was decided that on the 4th of May 2011, the president's birthday, he would give a speech and announce his resignation so that Gamal could contest free and fair elections. There certainly would be formidable competition. It would have been fair, of course, and Gamal Mubarak would certainly win, even by 50% plus one.
Before he could emerge triumphant from the presidential elections of 2011, Gamal needed to secure his power base by ensuring that parliament was filled with his political stooges. The parliamentary elections of December 2010 were so blatantly corrupt that no Egyptian believed the results when Gamal's NDP cronies took almost every seat.
Gamal, with his direct interference, wanted to build a different country, not based on institutions. So he sought to create a parliament matching his vision. A parliament with no opposition until he inherited power, entirely confident that no one in parliament would oppose him.
By the end of 2010, Gamal Mubarak controlled parliament, the cabinet, and the party. But one crucial piece was missing. Egypt's armed forces number 500,000 and are a state within a state. The generals, the air marshals, and the admirals accepted Mubarak Sr. as one of their own. But Mubarak Jr. was loathed with a vengeance.
لا طبعا. القوات المسلحة لم تكن.
Of course not. The armed forces were not happy with Gamal Mubarak because they did not see him as sufficiently qualified to lead the country.
القيادة بتاعت البلد. وهو نفسه جمال مبارك.
And Gamal Mubarak never approached the armed forces. There was a barrier between the armed forces and Gamal Mubarak, so there was no basis for acceptance or compromise.
Whether Egypt's army would ever have accepted a President Gamal Mubarak or would have staged a military coup will now never be known. History was to take a stranger route. In December 2010, when an unknown fruit seller in Tunisia set fire to himself, he sparked a revolution that would spread throughout the Arab world. No dictator would be safe in his bed, though not every one of them could see what was coming down the road.
We had conversations with Mubarak and the people around him after Tunisia saying, look, you need to recognize that this could happen in Egypt too. This is the time for you to open up. But again, he was quite dismissive of this.
بعد انتصار الثورة التونسية.
After the success of the Tunisian revolution, the three of them, Gamal, Ala, and Suzanne, were on sedatives. And as soon as they ran out of them, a private plane was sent to collect more.
لتأتي بمجموعة حبوب مهدئة أيضا لفترة جديدة. ما عدا مبارك لم يأكل.
Except Mubarak, who refused to take any, as he never believed that anyone would dare to do the same to him as had happened in Tunisia.
On the 25th of January 2011, the flames of revolt that had been so successfully lit in Tunisia reached Egypt's shores. Within days, the call to freedom had become an unstoppable force. Not even the protesters who took to the streets of our nation's cities could believe what they started. But even Mubarak's former Secretary of Information could see that the end game was being played out.
I appeared on state TV the next day of the revolution and told him that he needed to maintain his legacy, dismissed the cabinet that day, purged the parliament of skeptical politicians, start the reforms, and that it should all begin before Friday prayers. He just didn't listen. People were surprised by what I was saying, but I could foresee the future. I could see the people in Tahrir Square were fed up and weren't going to stop.
Mubarak did not listen to his former advisor. As Friday prayers ended on the 28th of January 2011, Egypt exploded. Mubarak simply did not understand that this was something new.
Mubarak marked the country with his habits. Through 3 decades, he was an accommodating man. He found the safest way to solve any problem is patience. Patience till it dissolves, when the momentum fades away.
By the end of that day of prayer and anger, Under pressure from the protesters, the police withdrew to be replaced by the army, and a curfew was imposed throughout the country. This was the president's first response. Then he offered up a token to the protesters. Very late that Friday night, he appeared on television.
لقد طلبت من الحكومة التقدم باستقالتها اليوم، وسوف أكلف الحكومة الجديدة اعتبارا من الغد بتكليفات واضحة ومحددة للتعامل الحاسم مع أولويات المرحلة الراهنة.
As far as Mubarak was concerned, he had done his bit and the people should be satisfied. So, as his country continued to burn, he turned his mind to other matters.
I received a call from him on the day the government resigned. He called while I was in the cabinet meeting. I was rather cautious and was wondering what was going on. He asked about the book fair and what our plans were. I replied that we had canceled it since Your Excellency did not attend, so he asked me to open it tomorrow. I said, tomorrow I won't be a minister, and all the publishers have left already.
He was convinced everything would be fine. And President Obama was saying to him, given everything that's going on, there's a possibility that you're not reading it correctly. And Mubarak just wouldn't hear of it. Mubarak was, I think in a complete state of denial.
After his speech tonight, I spoke directly to President Mubarak. He recognizes that the status quo is not sustainable and that a change must take place.
He couldn't understand why the Americans behave with him in such a way. And, he say, I serve the Western world for the last 31 years as the president of the, I guaranteed the stability in the Middle East. I have done a lot in order to see that the relation between us and the United States will keep and continue and be strong. I couldn't understood why suddenly he gets an order just to evacuate his chair.
إن هذا الوطن العزيز هو وطني مثلما هو وطن كل مصري ومصرية. فيه عشت وحاربت من أجله ودافعت عن أرضه وسيادته ومصالحه، وعلى أرضه أموت وسيحكم التاريخ علي وعلى غيري بما لنا أو علينا.
The president, it seems, was living in his own parallel universe, oblivious to the fact that his days were numbered.
حدثت صراعات ما بين
There were fights between Ala and Gamal, particularly on Wednesday, the 9th of February. The situation in the country escalated. The streets were getting angrier, and people threatened to march on the presidential palace. Ala grabbed his brother Gamal, threw him to the floor and said, "You ruined your father's legacy. You destroyed the family and made us fall to where we are today." Suzanne sat there lamenting in front of everyone.
Amidst these scenes of chaos and family fistfights, and with an angry crowd advancing on the presidential palace, on the 11th of February, the president finally realized the game was up. He would leave Cairo for his country house at the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh.
عندما قرر الرئيس أن يسافر إلى شرم الشيخ.
There was a real family crisis when the president decided to travel to Sharm el-Sheikh, as Suzanne and Gamal both refused to travel with him. The armed forces issued an ultimatum to both Gamal and his mother. Gamal was keen on traveling and tried convincing his mother, but she refused and said, "This is our house. They have already taken everything, and we are not leaving." Gamal had to physically drag her to the plane and push her inside.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أيها المواطنون، في هذه الظروف العصيبة التي تمر بها البلاد، قرر الرئيس محمد حسني مبارك تخليه عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية، وكلف المجلس الأعلى للقوات المسلحة لإدارة شؤون البلاد، والله الموفق والمستعان.
6 p.m. on Friday, the 11th of February 2011, will prove to be as important a moment in future history books studied by young Egyptians as any in the many thousands of years of our country. At this hour, almost 30 years of dictatorship came to an end. Suzanne and Gamal were to miss it all, as by the time the Mubarak dynasty was formally laid to rest, they were airborne on their way to Sharm el-Sheikh to meet up with the former president. Unlike the mood in the streets, it was not a happy reunion.
When she arrived in Sharm el-Sheikh, she wasn't aware that the president had stepped down. When she was told, she was outraged and shouted out, "We are all going to be destroyed, and we shall have to pay the price for this with you."
حكمت المحكمة حضوريا لجميع المتهمين، أولا بمعاقبة محمد حسني السيد مبارك بالسجن المؤبد عما أسند إليه من الاتهام بالاشتراك في جرائم القتل المقترن بجنايات قتل وشروع في قتل أخرى، موضوع الاتهام المسند إليه بأمر الإحالة. ثانياً بمعاقبة
From president to prisoner, the man who once had absolute power was now simply a convicted inmate. In a military hospital on the outskirts of Cairo, he lies, a broken man, faced only with his inevitable death and the certainty that there will be no Mubarak family dynasty.